Hi, I'm Rakesh Malhotra. I'm the Vice President of Products at Apprenda.
I want to be able to show you UrbanCode deployments. So the idea here is that you want to be able to standardize, simplify, and orchestrate deployments across multiple cloud platforms, right? And you want to be able to use, in this particular case, something like BlueMix, where you're building this modern front end that might be using BlueMix services, in this case, Twilio, Watson Dialog service. And then you want to be able to have multiple development teams coordinate their deployments with that new BlueMix stuff with on-premises applications. In this case, that might be running .NET. In fact, you also want to be able to provide an abstraction over the different APIs that are used by these different environments. So to put some context, additional context around the demo before I get into it, the use case here that I'm going to walk through is, imagine you have two development teams in your organization. One using Python, building a brand new BlueMix component that's going to use Twilio and Watson Dialog service. Might be using, in this case, since it's BlueMix, it's based on Cloud Foundry, using Cloud Foundry CLI and Cloud Foundry APIs. But another development team owns the back end of this piece, which might be a system of record. In this case, is a .NET service that's connected to a SQL Server database that provides a REST API to not just this BlueMix component, but to other enterprise applications that need access to sensitive customer data. So the customer, the enterprise customer, may not be able or as yet unwilling to move that data into a public cloud environment. But you want the BlueMix team and the front-end team to be able to access it, and we want these teams to work effectively together. And UrbanCode is really the abstraction, the facade that provides that capability. So let's swap back over to the demo, take a look at this in action. First, I'll go ahead and open up the UrbanCode deploy console, where I'll kick off the integration that we built. If I go ahead and click Applications, you'll see here a hybrid app, and that was described in the slide. So it's got two parts: the Apprenda.NET part that exposes a RESTful API to customer-sensitive data, and then the BlueMix Flask application, which is running in the BlueMix PaaS in the public cloud. Go ahead and kick off the integration. I'll select our process, and I'll choose versions of each of these apps. So just go ahead and choose the latest version of each app for deployment. I'll click OK, and then I'll click Submit. Now this entire process will take about 3 minutes to 4 minutes to complete, but it's got two parts. First, the UrbanCode deploy system is going to go ahead and install, configure this BlueMix Flask application in the BlueMix PaaS. Once that's done, it's actually going to take configuration values, endpoints, URLs, and other information, and tie that back to an Apprenda application which will be running on premises. So we're actually going to take configuration from the BlueMix application and then funnel that through to the Apprenda application using a token switching mechanism that we have. Now, as you'd imagine, these teams are doing this stuff manually. You'd have to coordinate these deployments organizationally, scheduling, and then of course there are different APIs and different configurations and settings that each of these environments expect. And so there's a lot of complexity that BlueMix is going to remove from the process, a lot of friction that's going to be removed from this process. The other cool thing about the BlueMix app is it actually uses a Twilio service as well as one of the Watson services. So if I bring up a quick architecture diagram here, you see here the BlueMix app is actually using Twilio, Watson Dialog service. So the developers working in that environment get to use a bunch of these next generation services, but they get to still access and work with a scalable backend which runs on .NET and Apprenda. It's really marrying these two different types of environments, organizations, and modes of development and IT operations. While this is finishing up, I'll go ahead and actually open up the BlueMix console. The other thing I should point out actually before I do that is I mentioned that you can integrate these with source control systems as well. So the BlueMix app is actually being sourced from a local GitLab repo, and TeamCity is being used to house the source code and backend for the Apprenda application. So as I mentioned earlier, the output of a continuous integration, continuous development, deployment system is the input into an Apprenda deployment process. So those two pieces of functionality end up complementing each other really well. So you see the BlueMix piece actually got deployed. The Apprenda piece is now in process. If I go ahead and log in to the BlueMix console, should be able to actually see that application. The Flask application, that's the front end for this e-commerce app that's accepting orders. So here's the Flask app right here. If I click on it, in the activity log, you'd actually see that we just actually updated the application and restarted it with the latest code that had been pulled from the GitLab repo. So the BlueMix piece is actually up and running, and now UrbanCode is configuring and deploying the Apprenda piece for the .NET component on the back end. And the other reason a lot of times customers aren't able to move some of these back-end applications to public cloud is they're actually used by multiple teams within the enterprise. And so that also makes coordination and moving some of those things a little bit tricky. But what you want to be able to do is provide the same agility, same operational agility to developers and even operational personnel, regardless of the fact that it's running on premises or in the cloud. So you can kind of marry these two models, the future model, agile, very quick development, and then cloud enabling the existing assets and portfolio that you have. And I'm using a .NET app here, but as you saw earlier, it could be a WebSphere app, it could be a JBoss or a Tomcat app, whichever app you happen to choose on the back end. Okay, so it looks like the app actually got deployed. If I go ahead and open it, we can interact with the application. It's just an app that accepts suit orders, so nothing particularly fancy. So the first thing I'll do is log in. And this login is actually federating back to on-premises to actually verify the customer's information with the database that's running and hosted on Apprenda. So I've logged into the application, and now I can go ahead and start buying suits. So let's take a couple of these, look at my cart. Got 4 different suits in here. They're about $800 a piece, so it's about a $3,000 order, something like that. Go ahead and hit submit. And now that order has actually been submitted on the back end into the Apprenda database. What I can't show you is that you'd also be getting a text message through Twilio that would be confirming the order for you, and that'd be handled by the front end. To show that we actually got this order on the back end, let's go back to the Apprenda console. Refresh this to make sure I still have a live session. And now I can go and show you the back end application that BlueMix Flask app was actually talking to. And it is somewhat humorously called Apprendazon. You'll notice here there's a version number that says version 15, and it says created by UrbanCode. So UrbanCode actually deployed this piece. If I actually launched the app, we put a simple UI in the front of this REST interface to show that to you. And you see that $3,000 suit order has shown up to my on-premises database. So we've successfully built, deployed, and interacted with a true hybrid application, right, from BlueMix PaaS to your Apprenda private cloud environment, and made that completely seamless for developers and organizations to consume. Now, it's obvious that you'd be able to consume these BlueMix services, including Twilio and Watson Dialog Service, with these next generation applications that are running in BlueMix. But we've also done integration to make it really easy for developers to actually incorporate BlueMix services as part of their on-premises application as well. So if I'm a .NET, WebSphere, Tomcat developer, and I want to use, for example, BlueMix Spark as part of my application, it's really simple to go ahead and provision a Spark instance directly through Apprenda, and this will be proxied back through BlueMix. So if I ask for a new instance, I'll give my instance a name. Just hit apply. And it'll take a few seconds to complete, but Apprenda is actually talking to the BlueMix broker, provisioning an instance of a Spark environment, and then it will return back to the developer the connection data to begin using it in her application. You can see here that I have a token that's been returned to me. So in the config file for my application as a dev, I just put hashtag add-on testsparkrm and hashtag, and Apprenda will automatically swap that out with the live connection data. This is the actual connection information of the Spark environment that's been brokered and provisioned for me in BlueMix. That way, if I move to different environments or change the connection string, perhaps I have different connections in dev test versus production, Apprenda will automatically, at deploy time, swap in the right connection data and token. So it's really easy to consume BlueMix services as part of your on-premises deployment, regardless of which middleware you're using, including WebSphere, of course. And when I show you this demo, you might think, well, hold on, wait a minute. You clicked and got a Spark environment. What about passwords, IDs, space IDs, all of those types of things? How come I didn't have to specify that? And the reason is because operators specify that. Developers don't need to worry about those things. So if I go to the operations console again in Apprenda, you'll notice I have this Spark add-on installed. Again, operators will install this, not developers. When I install the add-on, I configure it. First part of the configuration is I define whether developers have to actually pass their own credentials or whether corporate credentials are used. That way a developer doesn't have to create their own account in BlueMix. I can have a centralized corporate account that is used to provision the environment, and then the developer simply handed a connection back. So it takes shadow IT out of the picture here. Right? Developers don't need to go off on their own and devise mechanisms to access these next generation services. As an IT organization, you can bring those into the environment in a fully sanctioned way. And there are a bunch of other BlueMix parameters that are specified here as well. You can also control who gets access to these services. So if you want to roll out Spark or Cloudant or any of the other BlueMix services directly to a handful of development teams, you can filter which teams get access, which ones don't. And you can also decide how many instances of that service a particular development team is allowed to use. So you can set a quota. The idea here is to introduce these next generation cloud services into enterprise organizations in a controlled way, but allow developers to consume them in a fully seamless and frictionless way. And so you want both agility, but you can't sacrifice security and compliance. And we want it to provide both with their integration.